One of the best things about artistic expression is that it allows for all sorts of stories to be told, with the only limit being the creator's imagination, meaning that if someone doesn't want to stick to the boring rules of real life, they're under no obligation to do so. This, in turn, means that anything, no matter how strange it seems, can come to fruition if someone is given the right set of creative tools. Video games are no different in this respect, allowing for a great variety of interesting concepts. Many of the most popular video game stories are a bit odd if you think about them too hard, but some of them really lean into it, with complicated lore and baffling stories that somehow are still so well done that players adore them anyway. Today we're taking a look at some games that really go above and beyond in terms of bizarre premises, whether that's thanks to a mess of lore or a truly original concept. I'm Ashton from TripleJump, and here are 10 beloved video games with super weird premises. Number 10, Bioshock Infinite. The original Bioshock itself is a bit of a stretch, with its underwater individualist utopia turned splicer paradise. Perhaps more of a narrative stretch, though, is Bioshock Infinite, as that's where the whole plot really goes off the rails. At first, it seems to be the same basic concept, albeit taken in the opposite direction, with Columbia standing in as the city in a place where cities have no rights to be. Sure, it starts a little bit before things go horribly wrong this time, in a citywide downfall sense anyway, as it is built off rampant racism, but it's nothing we haven't seen before. The story takes a turn for the truly confusing once it starts to introduce the concept of alternate universes, and this ends up turning the rest of the game and even the whole Bioshock series on its head, as every multi-dimensional lighthouse has a man, a city, and presumably some massive mechanical monster guarding a girl. As if that weren't enough, it gets even more complicated once the Burial at Sea DLC is taken into account, as this sets up links between both Rapture and Columbia, and most importantly of all, suggests that Elizabeth is integral to the fate of both cities. Nothing like a little quantum theory to help you relax, eh? Number 9, The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. What could be a more classic tale than that of a hero saving the world from a horrible fate? Most commonly, this is what the titles in the Legend of Zelda series are, even if Link does occasionally get distracted by building Korok torture machines or turning into a wolf. That is, of course, unless you're talking about Majora's Mask, which is the point in this series where things truly take a turn for the weird, and occasionally nightmare-inducing. To start with, Link gets cornered by the ominous Skull Kid, who steals his trusty steed, Epona, leads him to the parallel world of Termina, and turns him into a Deku Scrub. As if this wouldn't be traumatizing enough, he happens upon the unsettling Happy Mask salesman not long after this, who tasks him with retrieving a stolen mask in exchange for lifting the transformation curse. This is all weird enough on its own, but it doesn't stop there. Termina in general is a strange place, but perhaps the most obviously out of place thing is the massive moon that bears down on the area, getting ever closer as Link goes through the 3-day time loop in order to collect the titular mask and save everyone, as it is capable of ending the world. Suddenly, Ganon doesn't seem all that bad, does he? Number 8, the Assassin's Creed series. The Assassin's Creed series isn't all that bizarre, and is instead just a bunch of vaguely connected stories of professional killers across the ages. Once you dig a little deeper though, specifically into the modern day parts that are often shoehorned in, for reasons no one understands, things take a turn for the complicated. If we start way back at the beginning of the series, it doesn't seem like all that much. This is when we meet our first modern-day protagonist, Desmond Miles, as he's being held by Abstergo Industries and hooked up to their Animus in order to help the higher-ups in the company hunt down the Pieces of Eden, artifacts which can manipulate human thoughts and behaviour. So far, so relatively standard sci-fi. However, the more the game explores the modern-day setting and exploits of the Assassin's Order and the Templars, the more complex it becomes. Eventually, we find out that the precursors were wiped out by a particularly powerful solar flare, a rare event that unfortunately for Desmond and the world is due to happen again. Thankfully, he's able to stop it, but it all comes at the cost of his own life. That's the short version anyway. Who knew a game about old-timey parkour could be so deep, eh? Number 7, Saints Row 4. Though it started off relatively tame, and the reboot seemed to strip all the fun out of things, the Saints Row series as a whole tends to be at least a bit on the wacky side. But it's Saints Row 4 that really takes the cake in terms of weirdness, and not just because of all the crazy stuff you can do. To start off with, the player character has, in the year since the previous game, been elected President of the United States, which is a strange enough turn of events. But wait, there's more. During a press conference one day, the Earth is invaded by aliens known as Zin, who end up destroying the White House and abducting the protagonist and a collection of their associates. Somehow though, the game still manages to get even stranger. From now on, everything is a simulation, as the crew find themselves in a virtual recreation of the game's iconic city of Steelport. Thanks to the simulated nature of the world then, everyone essentially finds themselves in possession of superpowers, which they can use however they see fit. Even the ending is pretty out there, making the game an absolute mess of ridiculousness all the way through. Number 6, the Metal Gear series. He may be a well-respected auteur, but I think it's pretty safe to say that Hideo Kojima is also certainly a bit of an eccentric. So it's no surprise that his games can be a bit out there, and the Metal Gear series is no exception. The first games were admittedly pretty straightforward, but as the franchise expanded, well, Kojima just couldn't help himself. Taken as individual games and as their own individual stories, all of these titles may not be all that bad. But as a whole, things get confusing quickly. To start with, the timeline is all over the place, as Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater is actually the first story chronologically, and it bounces all over from there. Also, in order to fully appreciate the story, players have to keep track of a load of global organisations, double crosses, traitors, martyrs, nuclear threats, military tensions, clones, and this is the point where our writer has to admit that she's never touched a Metal Gear game and is trying her best. Please don't yell at her. The character names are a whole can of worms as well, as there's Naked Snake, Solid Snake, and Liquid Snake. Ridiculously named folks like Hot Cold Man and also The End, who's a person and not some sort of story conclusion. Thankfully, that is the conclusion of this entry, because boy do I have a headache now. Number 5, Katamari Damacy. Perhaps one of the weirdest games ever made, Katamari Damacy is as strangely addictive as it is full of uncomfortably tight tights. If we're being honest, the story isn't really all that important, as at its heart, the bizarre title is a puzzle game, and it can be enjoyed as its own little weird experience, as players progress through the levels and eventually grow a ball of stuff big enough to collect people, whales, rainbows, and finally continents, even though they themselves are roughly the size of a pushpin. The plot, though, that somehow makes things even stranger. Essentially, you play as a prince, who has to reform stars and constellations by collecting random objects with a sticky ball, the Katamari of the title, after your father, the king of all cosmos, accidentally destroys them during a particularly aggressive night of drinking. There's also a bit of a side plot with a normal human family, the Hoshinos, as the father, who is an astronaut, is unable to go to the moon now that it's been destroyed, and has to wait until the prince reforms it in order to make it there. Fun fact, the title translates roughly to lump spirit. Does that make the game make any more sense? Well, no, not at all, obviously. I said fun, not helpful. Number 4, Catherine. In Catherine, there's a woman named Catherine and a woman named Catherine. Vincent is in a relationship with Catherine and isn't really sure what to do next in terms of their relationship, especially as she's getting a bit impatient and feels like they're stagnating. That's when Catherine comes along and complicates things by aggressively trying to insert herself into Vincent's life and living quarters, subsequently confusing his feelings about Catherine and his new feelings for Catherine. What do you mean you can't follow this? They're spelt differently. What more do you want? Anyway, if this were, for example, a visual novel, it could be a fairly straightforward story, similar names aside. But would you believe it if I told you Catherine is in fact a puzzle game? Each night, Vincent's psyche conjures up complicated towers for him to climb, which symbolise him trying to work through his feelings about the two women and various aspects of his relationship and life. Each of these end with a confessional, asking the player to choose which of the options is most important to them. And these choices influence the endings and decide whether Vincent abandons his longtime girlfriend or not. Either way, I'm going to guess at least one Catherine is disappointed. Number 3, Danganronpa series. The whole idea of Danganronpa is a bit of a weird one, but at this point that really shouldn't be much of a surprise. If you know nothing about this particular series though, it may be weirder than you had originally anticipated. The first of the game follows Makoto Noegi, a student who has just been accepted to Hope's Peak Academy. Once he arrives though, he goes a bit dizzy and later wakes up finding all the windows have been covered with metal plates and the entrance has been blocked by an impassable metal door. Once he meets the other students and they make their way into the school, they're greeted by Monokuma, the headmaster, who also happens to be a robotic bear, who tells them that they are trapped there and in order to escape, they'll have to kill each other, essentially forcing them into a battle royale, as in the movie, not Fortnite. From then on, the game turns into something that's part Phoenix Wright, part Saw, as the gameplay is divided between getting to know Makoto's classmates and getting to know who's no longer Makoto's classmate. That's just the first of the series as well, and each progressive game adds layers of lore, mystery, and weirdness to the mix. Number 2, Bugsnax. From the very first trailer, it was pretty clear that Bugsnax was going to be an absolutely bonkers game. An island full of half bug, half snacks that change body parts into food when they're eaten. Who comes up with this stuff? No, seriously, I want to know who's to blame for these nightmares. Despite being stuck somewhere between Saturday morning cartoon and body horror, Bugsnax is a surprisingly fun and silly game that follows a journalist who travels to Snacktooth Island in order to report on the strange life forms found there. Once on the island, they learn that Lizbert, the one who initially contacted them, has gone missing, and as they look for her, they're able to capture and catalogue each Bugsnax and use them to complete tasks for the other Grumpuses on the island, as well as force feed them and change their limbs into food and utensils. Well, it was almost nice. The thing is, the game takes an even stranger turn towards the end, and veers pretty solidly into horror territory before the final conclusion. And here you thought that hot dog limbs were going to be the worst thing this game had to offer. And number 1, the Kingdom Hearts series. Perhaps one of the most confusing and reluctantly weird stories in the entirety of the video game world is that of the Kingdom Hearts games. Because where do we even start with this one? You'd think it would at least begin relatively coherently, but even Kingdom Hearts 1 can be quite a bit to wrap your head around. It starts with Sora and friends on the lovely Destiny Island, before one night the place is attacked by creatures known as the Heartless, and Sora is chosen by the series' iconic weapon, the Keyblade, to fight them off. In the midst of all this though, we're introduced to Disney characters, namely Mickey, Donald and Goofy, the latter two of whom will join Sora on his adventure, and the idea that, apparently, they make up a large portion of this shared universe. If that crossover wasn't enough, Final Fantasy folks start dropping in as well. Then, once the sequels start getting involved, there's even more to worry about, with overlapping and concurrent timelines, mysterious organisations, evil wizards, and nobodies. And can you tell I'm not really sure what this series is all about anymore myself? Between all this and the absolute mess of a name some of these games have, it's a wonder anyone has a clue what's going on with Kingdom Hearts at this point.